The ballroom was a golden sea of candlelight and whispered secrets, but Serafina stood at its edge, utterly alone. No one looked at her. No one spoke to her. Her husband, Lucian Ashford, the Duke of Thornwood, was dancing with another woman. Lady Marguerite Vane moved in his arms like she had never stopped belonging there. Her head was tilted back, her lips parted in a soft laugh, and Lucian's hand rested at the small of her back with a familiarity that cut through Serafina like a blade. She watched him smile, a real smile, one he had never once given her in the 3 years of their marriage. The music swelled. The dancers turned. A group of young ladies near the refreshment table glanced at Serafina and then quickly away, their fans hiding mouths that were already shaping words like "poor Duchess" and "he never loved her." Serafina's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. She did not drink. She simply stood there, wearing a gown of pale blue silk that had been chosen because someone once told her it made her eyes look like dawn. That someone had not been her husband. The dance ended. Lucian escorted Marguerite back to her seat, his head bent low to catch something she said. The intimacy of it was unbearable. Serafina turned and walked out onto the terrace. The night air was sharp and clean. Below, the gardens of Thornwood House stretched into darkness. She gripped the stone balustrade and forced herself to breathe slowly. She would not cry. She had promised herself she would not cry any more over a man who looked past her as if she were made of glass. Inside, the music began again. He did not come looking for her. Theirs had been a marriage of necessity, not love. Serafina had known that from the very beginning, but knowing and feeling were two different countries, and she had lived in both. 3 years ago she had stood at the altar of a small country church, her hand trembling as it was placed into Lucian's. He had not looked at her then either. His eyes had been fixed somewhere above her shoulder, his jaw set, his vows spoken in a voice empty of warmth. The ceremony had taken less than a quarter of an hour. Afterward, he had escorted her to Thornwood Manor, shown her to a suite of rooms in the East Wing, and then left her there alone. She had sat on the edge of the great canopied bed, still in her wedding gown, and waited. The candles burned low. The house settled into silence. He never came. The next morning, a maid had brought her breakfast, and a brief note from the Duke explaining that estate business required his attention. That note had been the longest conversation they had shared in weeks. At first, Serafina had tried. She had tried so desperately that the memory of it now made her cheeks burn with shame. She had arranged her hair in the styles she thought he might admire. She had learned his favorite foods and instructed the cook. She had worn colors he once mentioned liking, read books from his library, and lingered in hallways hopping to catch a moment of his time. He had been courteous, and always distant. There were moments, fleeting and cruel in their brevity, when she thought she saw something else beneath the ice. Once she had stumbled in the garden and twisted her ankle, and he had lifted her into his arms without hesitation. For the space of 10 heartbeats, his grip had been strong and secure, his face so close she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. She had held her breath. Then he had set her down on a bench, called for a servant, and walked away without a backward glance. That night she had cried into her pillow until she had no tears left. After a year she stopped trying so hard. After 2 years she stopped hopping for any real change. Now, at the end of the 3rd year, she had stopped loving him. Or at least, that was what she told herself. The morning after the ball, Serafina sat alone at the breakfast table. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, painting golden squares on the polished floor. The room smelled of fresh bread and tea, but she had no appetite. Lucian entered without warning. He rarely took breakfast with her, and his sudden presence made her straighten in her chair. He was already dressed for riding, his dark hair slightly damp, his boots polished to a mirror shine. He nodded to her briefly, then took his seat at the opposite end of the long table. The distance between them was measured in silver dishes and years of silence. "Good morning," she said, her voice quiet. "Morning," he replied, unfolding a newspaper. The silence stretched. A servant poured his coffee. Serafina watched the steam rise from her cup and thought of all the things she had once longed to say to him. They had dried up now, like a well in a drought. "Lady Marguerite looked well last night," she said, and was surprised by her own calm. Lucien's hand paused on the newspaper. "Did she?" "Yes, the years have been kind to her." He said nothing. The newspaper rustled as he turned the page. Serafina felt something small and hard settle in her chest. She had given him an opening. She had practically handed him a chance to offer some reassurance, some small denial. He had taken none of it. She set down her napkin. "I shall be visiting the Foundling Home this afternoon. I may be late returning." He glanced up, a flicker of something crossing his face. "The Foundling Home?" "Yes, I have been volunteering there for several months now. The children are in need of books and instruction." He stared at her for a long moment. "I was not aware." "No," she said gently, "you were not." She rose and left the room before he could see the sting of tears she could not quite suppress. The Foundling Home sat at the edge of the village, a modest stone building with ivy climbing its walls and the sounds of children always spilling from its windows. Serafina had discovered it by accident one rainy afternoon when her carriage broke a wheel on the nearby road. While waiting for repairs, she had taken shelter inside and found a dozen bright-eyed orphans and one harried matron named Mrs. Pemberton. Serafina had returned the next day with books, and the day after that with paper and pencils, and then it had simply become her purpose. Here she was not the ignored Duchess. She was Miss Sira, the kind lady who read stories and mended torn jackets and always remembered a child's name. On this particular afternoon, she was kneeling on the floor helping a small boy trace his letters when a shadow fell across the slate. She looked up to find a gentleman watching her with an expression of quiet amusement. "Forgive my intrusion," he said. "Mrs. Pemberton directed me here. I am looking for the library." He was tall and thin, with spectacles perched on his nose and a leather satchel slung across his body. His clothes were neat but not fashionable, the mark of a scholar rather than a gentleman of leisure. His eyes were warm and curious. "There is no formal library yet," Serafina admitted, rising and brushing chalk from her skirt. "Only a few shelves of donated books in the next room. I am trying to organize them, but it is slow work." "Then perhaps I can assist. My name is Nathaniel Greaves. I am a tutor by profession, recently arrived in the village. I saw the home on my walks and thought I might offer my services." Something in Serafina's chest loosened. It was so rare to be spoken to like this, as a person of interest and value. "I would be grateful for any help, Mr. Greaves. I am the Duchess of Thornwood." His eyebrows rose slightly, but he did not fawn or retreat into formal stiffness. Instead, he simply smiled. "Then the children are fortunate in their Duchess." They worked together for the next 2 hours, sorting books and discussing education. Nathaniel Greaves spoke of philosophy and history with a quiet passion that reminded Serafina of her father, a man who had loved learning until the day he died. For the first time in months, she laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of her by a dry observation about a particularly dull volume of sermons. She did not realize how late it had become until Mrs. Pemberton appeared to light the lamps. Nathaniel insisted on escorting her to her carriage, and as he handed her up the step he said, "I hope you will return soon, Your Grace. The children will miss you, and so, I think, will the library." Serafina smiled. "I will be back tomorrow." As the carriage rolled away, she caught sight of a rider on the hill overlooking the road. Even in the fading light, she recognized the set of those shoulders, the dark horse, the familiar shape of her husband. He turned and rode away without descending. Marguerite Vane's return to society had not been subtle. She had arrived in the county a month ago, taking up residence at her late husband's estate, and within a week every drawing-room hummed with her name. She was still beautiful, still poised and still possessed of the ability to command attention without appearing to seek it. Her widowhood had only added a romantic sheen of tragedy to her story. The story, as Serafina had pieced together from overheard whispers, was that Marguerite had been Lucien's first love. They had been all but betrothed when she abruptly accepted the proposal of a wealthy viscount twice her age. Lucien had been devastated. He had retreated into cold reserve and political ambition, eventually marrying Serafina for reasons she still did not fully understand. Duty, perhaps, or the need for an heir, or simply because his mother had insisted. Now Marguerite was back, and Lucien's careful walls seemed to be crumbling. Serafina did not confront him. She did not demand explanations or make accusations. She simply observed. She noticed the way he lingered in the drawing room when Marguerite called, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. She noticed the canceled dinners and the long rides that coincided with Marguerite's reported outings. She noticed everything and said nothing. The second humiliation came at a private dinner party hosted by the Ashfords' nearest neighbors. Serafina was seated at the opposite end of the table from Lucien, while Marguerite was placed beside him. Throughout the meal, she watched them converse in low tones, their heads inclined toward each other like figures in an intimate portrait. The other guests pretended not to notice, but their glances slid sideways, their smiles grew tight. Then Lady Ashworth, an elderly dowager with a talent for cruelty disguised as concern, raised her voice slightly. "Your Grace, how delightful it must be to have Lady Marguerite return to the county. She was such a dear friend to the Duke in his youth, was she not?" The table fell quiet. Serafina felt every eye turned toward her, waiting. She laid down her fork with careful precision. "I am always pleased to welcome my husband's friends," she said, her voice steady. "The past should be honored, not forgotten." A murmur of approval rippled around the table. Marguerite's smile flickered, just for an instant. Lucien looked at Serafina with an expression she could not read. After dinner, she excused herself early, pleading a headache. As she climbed the stairs to her rooms, she heard footsteps behind her. "Serafina." She turned. Lucien stood at the foot of the staircase, one hand on the banister. His face was shadowed, but his voice carried an unfamiliar edge. "That was gracefully done," he said. "Was it?" "I know what they were trying to do. You did not take the bait." She looked down at him, this man she had married, this stranger she had once loved. "I am accustomed to not taking bait, my lord. It is a skill I have developed over 3 years of practice." She saw him flinch. It was small, barely a tightening around his eyes, but it was there. She did not wait for a reply. She continued up the stairs and closed her door behind her. The change in Serafina was gradual and quiet. She did not announce it. She did not make declarations or dramatic gestures. She simply began to live her own life. She spent more time at the Foundling home. She accepted an invitation to join a ladies' charitable society. She began taking long walks in the countryside with only a sketchbook for company. When Lucien sent word that he would not be home for dinner, she no longer waited. She ate alone with a book propped open, and she found that she did not mind. Nathaniel Greaves became a regular presence in her days. He was always at the Foundling home when she arrived, always ready with a new idea for the library or a story about his travels. He treated her with a gentle respect that made her feel seen, valued, and understood. He never flattered her or made improper advances. He simply liked her, and that simple liking was more nourishing than any grand romance had ever been. One afternoon, as they were arranging a shipment of new books, he looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "You seem different today, Your Grace. Lighter, perhaps." She considered the observation. "I suppose I have decided to stop carrying something that was never mine to hold." He did not ask what she meant. He simply nodded and handed her another book. Lucien noticed. He noticed the way she no longer looked up when he entered a room. He noticed the absence of her quiet questions about his day, her small attempts to draw him into conversation. He noticed that her clothes were simpler now, her hair less elaborate, as if she had stopped performing for an audience that never applauded. But most of all, he noticed Nathaniel Greaves. He had seen them together through the window of the Foundling home, their heads bent over a desk in shared concentration. He had seen the way Greaves made her laugh, the easy warmth that passed between them. He had seen. And he had felt something sharp, an unfamiliar twist inside him. Jealousy was a foreign emotion to Lucian Ashford. He had spent his life mastering control, and he had never before been mastered by a feeling. But it grew, this jealousy, with every report his steward brought him of the Duchess's activities, with every glimpse he caught of her walking in the garden with Greaves at her side, perfectly proper, and yet utterly infuriating. He found himself standing at the window of his study one evening, watching her carriage return as darkness fell. She stepped down alone, her face serene, and she did not glance toward his window. She simply walked inside, her footsteps light on the gravel, and the door closed softly behind her. He turned to the decanter on his desk and poured himself a glass of brandy he did not drink. The confrontation came on a Sunday afternoon. Marguerite had come to call, as she did now with increasing regularity, and Seraphina had received her with cool politeness in the drawing room. The conversation was a delicate exercise in veiled hostility, with Marguerite making pointed references to the past and Seraphina deflecting each one with serene indifference. Then Marguerite leaned forward slightly, her eyes glittering. "You must be so relieved, Your Grace, that society has accepted your marriage. A union built on such practical foundations can be difficult to sustain, I imagine." Seraphina felt the sting of the words but did not let it show. "I have found that foundations built on mutual respect are stronger than those built on fleeting passion, Lady Marguerite, but perhaps you would not know." Marguerite's smile sharpened. Before she could respond, Lucian entered the room. He paused at the threshold, his gaze moving between the two women. "Marguerite," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "I did not expect you today." "I came to see you, Lucian." She rose and moved toward him with the easy confidence of someone who had once been promised everything. "We have so much to discuss. The old days, the memories. I have missed your company." Seraphina stood. "Then I shall leave you to your reminiscences. I have an engagement in the village." She walked past them both without looking back, but as she reached the door, Lucian's voice stopped her. "Seraphina." She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she could not decipher, something caught between confusion and frustration. Marguerite stood beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm. "Yes, my lord." He hesitated. "Nothing, never mind." Seraphina inclined her head and left. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm on her face, and she walked toward the stables with a steady stride. She did not cry. She did not feel anything at all, except a quiet, absolute certainty that something had ended. The letter arrived 3 days later. It was addressed to Seraphina in a familiar hand, and when she opened it in the privacy of her sitting room, tears finally spilled down her cheeks. It was from her younger sister, Celia. The letter was full of joy and gratitude. She was married now to a good man, a country doctor with kind eyes and a gentle heart. She wrote about the garden she was planting, the small cottage they called home, the baby that would arrive in the spring. And she wrote the words that Seraphina had never expected to read. "I owe it all to you, Sera, everything. You saved me. When the scandal broke and our name was ruined, when Lord Drayton threatened to expose me unless I married that horrible man, you sacrificed yourself. You went to the Duke of Thornwood and offered him the only thing you had left, your hand in marriage, in exchange for his protection of our family. I know he agreed only because of the old promise to father. I know he never loved you. But I will spend my life thanking God that you loved me enough to give up your own chance at happiness. I am sorry he does not see you as you truly are. One day, I pray, he will." Seraphina pressed the letter to her heart and wept. She wept for the girl she had been, the one who had walked into a cold marriage with hope in her chest and a prayer on her lips. She wept for the years of silence and solitude, the dinners eaten alone, the ballrooms where she was invisible. She wept until there was nothing left, and then she dried her eyes and made a decision. She would ask Lucien for a separation. She found him in the library that evening, standing before the fireplace with a book in his hand that he was not reading. He looked up as she entered, and something in her expression made him set the book aside. "I would like to speak with you," she said. "I am listening." She folded her hands before her, her posture calm, her voice steady. She had rehearsed these words so many times that they came without effort. "I wish to retire to the dower house at Thornwood. I will not seek a formal separation, as I know that would cause scandal and harm your political standing. But I can no longer live here as your wife in name only, invisible in my own home. I will reside quietly at the dower house. You will be free to live as you choose." The silence that followed was absolute. The fire crackled. A log shifted and sent sparks spiraling upward. Then Lucien spoke, and his voice was hoarse. "No." Serafina blinked. "I beg your pardon." "I said no." He took a step toward her, and for the first time in 3 years she saw genuine emotion in his eyes. It was not anger. It was something closer to panic. "You cannot leave." "I am not asking your permission, my lord." She said it gently, without rancor. "I am informing you of my decision. You are my wife. I have been your wife for 3 years, and in all that time you have never once looked at me. Not truly. I have been a shadow in your house, a name on a marriage contract, a duty you endured. I cannot live like that any longer. I will not." He stared at her, his face pale, his hands clenched at his sides. "What has changed? Is it Greaves? Have you feelings for him?" The question should have made her angry. Instead, it made her tired. "Mr. Greaves is a friend. He treats me with courtesy and respect. That is more than I have ever received from you, but it is not the reason I am leaving. The reason, Lucien, is that I have finally accepted the truth. You do not love me. You have never loved me. And I cannot spend the rest of my life waiting for something that will never come." She turned to go. He caught her arm. "Wait," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. "Wait, please." She stopped. His grip was light, almost desperate, and when she looked up at him, she saw something breaking behind his eyes. "I did not know," he said. "I did not know why you married me." She went very still. "What do you mean?" "I thought you wanted the title, the wealth. I thought you were like all the others, seeking advantage. I did not know about Celia. I did not know about Lord Drayton's threat. Or the sacrifice you made. My steward, Hartley, told me everything this morning. He knew your father. He kept the secret for your sake, but he could not bear to see you so unhappy any longer." Serafina's heart thudded painfully. "Hartley told you." "He told me that you gave up everything to protect your sister. He told me that you came to me not as a fortune hunter, but as a woman desperate to save her family from ruin. And I—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "I treated you as if you were nothing. I was so consumed by my own wounded pride, my own foolish heartbreak over Marguerite, that I never saw you. I never saw you." Tears slipped down Serafina's cheeks. She did not try to stop them. "You loved Marguerite. I knew that from the beginning." "I thought I did." He released her arm and turned away, running a hand through his hair. "When she left me for another man, I swore I would never let myself feel anything again. I built walls so high I could not see over them. And when you came, so quiet and so patient, I did not know what to do with you. I was afraid. Afraid that if I let you in, you would leave me too. So I kept you at a distance. I convinced myself you did not care. I was a fool." Serafina stood motionless, her tears falling silently onto the front of her gown. 3 years, Lucien. 3 years of silence and loneliness. You let me believe I was invisible." He turned back to her, and his face was raw with regret. I know what I have done, and I know I have no right to ask for anything now. But I am asking, please do not leave. Give me a chance to make amends. Let me show you that I can be the husband you deserved all along." She looked at him for a long, long moment. The firelight flickered across his features, illuminating the lines of grief and hope etched there. This was the man she had married, the man she had once loved with all her young heart. He was asking her to trust him again. "Why should I believe you?" she whispered. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. He opened it slowly, revealing a ring. It was not the cold, formal band she wore on her finger. This one was delicate, a circle of diamonds and sapphires that caught the firelight and scattered it like stars. "This was my grandmother," he said. "She gave it to me on her deathbed and told me to give it to the woman I loved with my whole heart. I have never given it to anyone. I have been carrying it with me for a week, trying to find the courage to offer it to you. I was too late. I know I am too late, but I am offering it now if you will take it." Serafina looked at the ring. She looked at the man who had ignored her for 3 years, who was now standing before her with tears in his eyes and his heart in his hands. She thought of the long, lonely nights, the cold breakfasts, the ballrooms where she had stood alone. She thought of Celia's letter and the foundling home and the quiet peace she had begun to find in her own company. And then she thought of the moment he had carried her in the garden, his arms strong and steady, his face close enough to touch. She had loved him then. Some part of her, despite everything, still did. "I am not the same woman you married," she said. "I have changed. I have grown stronger. I will not be invisible again." "I do not want you to be invisible," he said. "I want you to be seen. I want you to be known. I want to spend the rest of my life learning every part of you that I was too blind to notice before." She reached out and touched the ring with one fingertip. "One chance, Lucien. That is all I can promise. One chance to prove that your words are not empty." He slid the ring onto her finger beside the wedding band. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant for her. The weeks that followed were not easy. Trust broken over years could not be mended in days. But Lucien tried with a determination that astonished everyone who knew him. He began to accompany Serafina to the foundling home, and though he was awkward at first, the children soon adored the tall, stern duke who could not resist bringing them sweets. He dismissed Marguerite from his life with a quiet finality, and when she protested, he told her simply that his heart belonged to his wife and always would. He learned to listen. He learned to ask about her day and wait for the answer. He learned to see her, truly see her, and what he found was a woman of quiet strength, sharp intelligence, and a capacity for love that had survived years of neglect. And slowly, tentatively, Serafina began to believe him. On an evening in late autumn, they walked together through the gardens of Thornwood. The leaves were golden and red, and the air smelled of wood smoke and fallen apples. Lucien stopped beneath an old oak tree and turned to face her. "I have something to tell you," he said. "Something I should have told you years ago." She waited. "I love you," he said. The words were simple, unadorned, and they fell into the quiet air like stones into still water. "I think I have loved you for a long time, but I was too afraid to admit it. I loved your patience. I loved your grace. I loved the way you never gave up on me, even when I gave you every reason to. I loved you too late, but I love you now." Serafina looked up at him, at this man who had been a stranger for so long and was now becoming something else entirely, something precious. "I loved you," she said softly, "and then I stopped, but I think I could learn to love you again." He took her hands in his and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "Then teach me," he murmured against her skin. "Teach me how to be worthy of you." The winter came and went, and with the spring came a wedding. Not a grand affair, but a quiet ceremony in the village church where they had first been bound together. Serafina wore a gown of pale gold, and Lucien's eyes never left her face. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife for the second time, there was no distance in his gaze, only a fierce and tender joy. Afterward, as they stood together on the church steps, Serafina felt his arm slide around her waist. He drew her close and pressed a kiss to her temple. "I will spend every day of my life making sure you never feel invisible again," he said. She smiled and leaned into his warmth. The village bells rang out, clear and bright, and somewhere in the crowd, a small boy from the foundling home waved a banner he had painted himself. Miss Sira and the Duke, forever. Serafina laughed, and it was a laugh full of light. She had stopped waiting for love. She had learned to live without it. And in the letting go, she had found it waiting for her all along, patient and true, ready to begin again. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Thornwood Manor, and in the quiet of the library, Serafina sat reading. Lucian entered and crossed the room without a word. He knelt beside her chair, took the book gently from her hands, and looked up into her eyes. "I have loved you in silence," he said. "I have loved you too late, but I will love you now and always with every breath I have." She touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "Then love me well," she whispered, "and I will love you in return." He leaned forward and their foreheads touched. The fire crackled. The world outside faded, and in the heart of the great house, two people who had once been strangers finally came home.